So, sir, by all means, introduce yourself to the audience and we'll take it from there.
I'm Andrea Verlicchi. I live in Italy and I'm a performance nerd. I've been in the industry for more than 25 years, I'm afraid. It's almost 26. And yeah, always in the web industry since the beginning.
Apparently.
And I got into performance 5 years ago.
Mhm.
And I like to do presentations about core Web vitals and what I am actually working on
Okay.
writing my blog posts.
So you said you've been in the web industry 26 years, but let's sort of like reverse a bit. Tell us about who you are, where you work.
Where I work?
Yes.
I work at Baqend. The name of the company is Baqend, but actually the brand is SPDY. We do this product, which is a website accelerator. So it makes your website load faster and pre-render the next pages faster and do compression dictionaries and everything cool there is in the web performance today. It's enabled by just adding one install script, just one script, and then we do all the rest. That's pretty amazing technology. And for that company that accelerates, especially loading times, and collects RAM data as well, I do 2 things. One thing is to help our customers improve IMP and CLS when they have problems with that by running audits and present to them. And the second thing is to analyze our RAM data to find anomalies in different metrics. And that I do with Brian, my colleague. And when there is an anomaly, we send a notification to Grafana IRM and we get notified on Slack. So we investigate. We might inform our customers depending on the type of anomaly.
I'm going to ask one thing real quickly. You mentioned that you work on IMP and CLS. So is there someone else that works on LCP?
Yeah, because the product itself improves LCP by a lot, because that's the main point, right? You install this and it caches pre-renders, user compression dictionaries. So just by using our product, LCP is like dealt with automatically. It does all the optimization, images optimizations, moving the scripts down. Everything is automatically done by SPDY. So that's the LCP solved.
Okay. So then, would you then, and we could talk about this in greater details later, but would you then, kind of sort of surmise that, IMP and CLS are probably maybe a bit more problematic?
Well, they are not easy to solve via a service worker, right? Service worker can do every kind of magic in the network and proxying and caching and that kind of things. You can also change the HTML of the served pages if you want. But to fix a CLS problem and an IMP problem, which can be very specific to CSS and JavaScript code of the customer, that's more of a, like say, handcrafted work, right? It needs to be, looked into by a human. I also tried with AI, but it's not yet that powerful.
How long have you been at Baqend?
It's been 2 years.
Okay.
Almost. So 1 year and 11 months.
Okay. And prior to that, were you working also sort of like in a core performance industry?
So before I worked 2 years in another company, which was also super performance focused, but we were developing a RAM tool, but in the end that didn't end up very well. And before that, I worked in an e-commerce company for 10 years. It's an Anglo-Italian company. It was founded in Italy as Yoox.com, YOOX.com, and in 2004, if I remember correctly. And then in 2015, it was merged with an English company called Net-a-Porter.
Okay.
So that in the end, we had the 2 big stores, and we were also managing a lot of online flagship stores. So
Mhm.
Valentino.com, Dolce Gabbana, Armani, you name it. At a certain the moment of biggest expansion, we were managing 34 online stores for the mono-brand online flagship stores. And I was working in that department, not on Yux.com. And there, after so I worked there for 10 years. The last 5 years of my career, I was a front-end architect.
Mhm.
And we started an organism inside. So we had 10 different teams developing the more or less 3 online stores, each one, and developing and maintaining. And so when we started caring about web performance, it was the years where the Courier virus came out, and Gilberto Cocchi approached us because we had a technology partnership with Google. And so we started trying to improve LCP, CLS, and IMP, and not IMP at the time, FID.
Mhm.
But yeah, so when we had to do that, and we had so many teams working on so many different online stores, we started with the idea of making an organism which we called the Performance Guild, which was taking one developer for each team and make them communicate on what they were working on. I also have a slide if you want to share. It's a Performance Guild. So every team had at least one person which was our performance champion. So those persons had the ability to work on only web performance for at least 1 day a week. So we reserved some time to work on web performance, and the project managers knew. So everything was also shared with the management. It was not a hacky decision from below.
Mhm.
Uh, and that worked because the performance was improved a lot.
Yeah, yeah, significantly. And so this is really interesting. So last week, Amrik talked about how he had a manager, even though this manager was not very technical, but very much, believed in the actual performance culture, and he was sort of like encouraged at every step to sort of make things, better, more usable, faster, et cetera, et cetera. So it sounds like right now the organization that you worked for thought the same way.
Yeah. So we had to push it from below because it was also a way to engage developers more, because we were not using any fancy framework or library. We were not using React at the time. It was more than 10 years ago. So it was before React. And we created our own platform. The front end platform was created from scratch. It was a bespoke platform. So started to be a little bit bored by the fact that they were just doing ultimately mostly CSS and JavaScript, but not very engaging for most of them. So one of the reasons why we made the Performance Guild was to be able to also engage the developers. And the business part was also engaged by Google on the other side, because we had also the partnership with them. So pushing from up and from the bottom, it worked. And then we also had to bring the performance culture to the designers. For example, do not design banners that push everything down, uh, because that's bad for CLS. We
Mhm.
had that before. Do not do this. So a lot of best practices, a lot of things that we had to share with the project managers, the UX guys, the designers. And because to bring the performance culture is also to reserve time to work and improve what you currently have. If you're loading all the images without lazy loading, that's a thing that you have to fix, right? And those things.
No, that's fantastic. you've made an extremely good point here because a lot of times when we think of performance culture, for the most part, it has to do with the engineers. It's like, hey, let's have a meeting. Let's talk about this. Let's have a weekly stand up, whatever. And the fact that you mentioned designers, a lot of designers do not realize they have a lot of say in what goes into the engineering of a site. I'm not going to say they demand, that the site looks a particular way, but they may have an idea of how they want it to look. But you might come back and say, hey, we don't hate this, but we just want to let you know, here are the possibilities of things being a little slower, a little jankier, because this is what you're asking for,
Yeah.
you know? And not to inject myself, but I remember I gave a talk twice, I think, to a room full of designers. And I really spoke in a design language like, hey, this layout looks amazing. Now, here are the possibilities for bottlenecks. And I kind of went through it. And I remember someone came back and said, listen, great presentation, but how is it that you had the best slides here? That's all I remember. They were like, how the engineer come in to have the best slides in a room full of designers? This is impossible. But all that aside, I think it's incredible because I I've always said that e-commerce is the one place where you will, in all likelihood, run into all the problems that exist on the web. From back end calls to like images to like name it, and there's a possibility for issues, and that happens in the ecom world. So I've always felt like ecom had this very like important place where if you understand how to make ecom run smoothly, you've been through it.
Yeah.
You've seen all the challenges. um
I could say that is true. And back to the designer part, unluckily, we didn't have the chance to feedback to the designers
mm,
because the design was happening in Milan in another office. And for the online flagship store part, at least, we were not asked our opinion. We, when we received the design, it was like signed and sealed, so we couldn't provide with feedback. The only thing that we could do when we launched the Performance Guild was me and my colleague Alberto, we were to Milan, talk to the designers and say, hey, these are some basic rules if you don't want to screw up web performance. Don't do this, don't do that. And that's the for the future designs at least.
mhm, mhm. Shout out to Gilberto. We've been going back and forth about him being on the stream because I want him to also come in and talk about his experience working with, ecom and the conversations that he's having to help people like yourself, or should I say your team, be as proficient as possible in that space. I have to say, is your closet full of Armani and Dolce and and all that? Like, is that all you wear? The high end Italian?
What I wear?
Yes.
No. Unluckily, no. I don't. I don't like to be like that fancy. I just wear normal clothes. But when I was working there, I had a decent discount, so I was buying at least Armani Exchange, so the lower tiers of the brand. Yeah,
Okay, okay. Maybe your wife is asking for special gifts.
that's true.
That's awesome. All right, so let's get into what I like to ask all my guests who come on this stream. What is your earliest memory of working on performance? Was it a blog post? What made you really like working in the space?
The earliest memory working on performance. So when I started, it was with a hackathon we ran in London 2019 at Google offices. I'm sharing the screen now if you want.
Yeah, I see that.
It was
Done.
with my team.
Okay, here we go.
That's me saying, behold, people at PWA. PWAs were a big thing at the moment, progressive web applications.
Yeah.
And that hackathon there was to take a website and make it a PWA in one day. So it was the first experience, and that's how I got into web performance. Um, that's the first memory. But this is 2019 because web performance is a topic from that period. But the web was, the web was born. Okay, not born, but for me, the first web pages I made was into 1999 and 2000. Yeah.
Okay.
It was the time of, you remember Macromedia? Does it ring any bell?
Of course.
It became Adobe
Yeah.
Flash, but Macromedia Flash was a big thing at the time.
Mhm.
And so after I finished the school, high school, I just went to the boom. There was a boom on the web world and all this animation stuff with Flash. And so a lot of designers making websites like crazy with long intros and stuff. I don't know if you where they are to remember, but it was an amazing time, and that was attracting me a lot. And so I started also to specialize on Flash and ActionScript 2 and then ActionScript 3, and we made a lot of crazy designs and animations that I really miss that part now. From now, you can do some of the things with CSS, but that was a total different level, I suppose. The performance was not a big thing at the time. You had to like skip, or either you skip the intro or you just were there watching stuff happening on the screen.
What got you interested in PWAs?
Gilberto.
Gilberto,
No, yeah,
love
because
that guy.
we wanted to. So there was not a strong reason behind it, I guess.
Mhm.
But the the thing was to make the website also work offline when there was a
Mhm.
internet interruption. Maybe you're on the London Tube and the website goes away. You don't want to miss the customer. You lose the customer, and so the website keeps showing the page. It doesn't show the dinosaur. You're offline,
Mhm.
but keep showing the page, and just the banner pops up, and you're temporarily offline. Hold a minute, and then when you're back online, it pops up again. It says, "Hey, you're again now online. You can do whatever you want." Now, to make a website work offline, that's a different beast because you have to manage queues of things that you want to add to cart and stuff. Pre-download some pages to work offline and stuff. So, but with Chloe.com, we made a decent job there. That was that was one of the things, but I wouldn't say there is a big. Yeah, the brand was really interested also in to be able to install the website as an app
Mhm.
on Windows or on the Mac using Chrome. So yeah, mostly brand pushed, not from the bottom or from the company.
Yep, yep. Yeah, that was definitely an interesting time. I remember that little push around PWAs and whatnot. Shout outs to Jake Archibald because he used to talk about it a lot back then
Yeah.
on Twitter. No, that's awesome, man. And it's interesting that Gilberto's name comes up a few times now. Like I now I'm going to have to demand him come on the stream because it sounds like he's like culture. He's walking around getting people to care about performance. So good on him. Um, let's fast forward to a few weeks ago. So for those who may not know, and I talked about it a couple of times, but that around oh my god, Halloween, so the last week of October, um, a lot of people, a lot of engineers made their way down to Amsterdam for this conference called Performance Now. Andrea did as well. And the night before the conference, actually, the good people at Mozilla organized a pre-event called Performance Sync, I believe it's called, right? And they had a number of people come up and give lightning talks. Andrea was one of them, and he really talked about, we get back to the core vitals here, and what he spoke of earlier in terms of working on IMP. He talked about working on IMP, and I think you were talking about like three real world issues that you spotted along the way. Now, did you want to, do you want to pull up the slides and talk about it, or just start just sort of like having that conversation?
The thing is that I continuously find maybe this slide, I continuously find three mistakes. One is the analytics thing, the analytics push to tag managers running synchronously. The second one is to force the reflow, and that causes also IMP because the style and paint and layout takes time on the main thread. And also, if you run too much JavaScript at the same time on click, or while the page is loading, you initialize all the sliders you have on the page, and everything that is also below the fold is also running. So I just wanted to say, hey, people, stop doing this, because I always find this. So it's like, how do you say, an advice is to please stop doing this, because it's I always find it in IMP audits.
And so when you say you do IMP audits now, are these mostly, and again, because, getting back to your experience in e-commerce, a full decade of just like being in the weeds, do you know, are there sort of like some signs where you could say, oh, I bet you this is an IMP issue because X, Y, Z? And again, your experience will sort of bring that out of a page.
I'm not sure I understood the question. Can you repeat it? Sorry.
Yeah, certainly. So, you'd mentioned that you'd spent 10 years, Net-a-Porter, and all that, and all those brands. And so you've seen, what a potential challenge looks like, right? And so now with the IMP issues, you're saying that, you're seeing a lot of it. Like, do you know where to look immediately to find the issue?
Well, it's not that immediate. You have to, well, a huge help comes from the attribution data we get from the RAM data. So
Mhm.
when users are interacting with the pages, also with slower devices, we collect all of those interactions data,
Mhm.
and we can actually see what was the slowest interaction in the page. So you cannot just look at the web page and say, hey, this is a slow interaction,
Mhm.
because usually you're running on a fast machine or maybe on a fast phone. But you have to look at what people are experiencing in the real world with RAM data, right?
Mhm.
And so first, look at the Crux data to see if the real users are experiencing a bad IMP. And then if you see that the IMP is not optimal, I open an investigation dashboard that I created based on our data, and I'll look at the last week of interactions across all devices, usually mobile, because mobile is usually slower than desktop, and if we exclude tablets, and see what's the slowest interaction. It's usually a pointer interaction, not a keyboard interaction, because pointer interaction are more common. And we get the exact element selector that was clicked, and then at that point, and we also get the slowest function that was called the longest running function, thanks to LOAF data.
Mhm.
But then at that point, I don't have to go to the website, click everywhere to find the slow interaction. I know exactly where to look, and then I go there and slow down the CPU, start a recording, perform that exact action, and then stop the recording and analyze the flame chart. And usually I get something like this. So that's one of the thing that I got. The other one is, wait, this one. This is the one of them. So after you stop the recording, you get a slide like this, and a chart like this. And you see there is a long pointer interaction, and whatever is happening below below is like the function that are being called during that pointer interaction. But in this case, you see a lot of problematic calls here that are calling push, push, push to the data layer a lot of times. And that means that we are synchronously sending data to the GTM.
Mhm.
And if you're not leaving the page, but you're just, I don't know, selecting the size of an e-commerce item,
Mhm.
then you don't have to do it while the interaction is going. You can do it later. You can postpone it, break down the long task, and then let the browser respond to the user interaction. That's the biggest thing.
Nice. Now, you just mentioned that a couple of things you mentioned that you're seeing obviously slower devices on your network through the RUM data. Now, we know slow devices are out there. Do you have any kind of data into how often you get quote unquote slow devices show up on your network?
You don't, because there are a couple of indicators that are only exposed by Chrome, that
Mhm.
are the number of CPUs and the gigabytes of memory. But now they are also getting limited to avoiding fingerprinting users.
Mhm.
So you don't really know how fast are the devices. You can only guess by the difference of the IMP on your machine and the IMP on the 75th percentile collected by Chrome User Experience, no Crux. So that's the only thing. So you can probably guess that some sites that sell groceries have a certain type of devices, and
Mhm.
if you're on a website that sells very expensive bikes, then maybe people on that website have faster devices. That's the only guess. And then you see also the IMP with the same kind of interactions. The IMP changes because that's heavily depending on the CPU of the device.
Right, right. Um, I need to double check, but I know TPAC just happened over in Japan, and there was something along the ways of a discussion around CPU and some kind of new API. I don't know, but I need to double back and to see if this was sort of part of the conversation. Um, One of the things that you'd mentioned in terms of like the three errors or issues that you find a lot in your audits, and this is a classic one, and who knows whether it's going to change anytime soon. But you had mentioned that you just see a lot of JavaScript being used.
Yeah, unfortunately. Um, but luckily, the CSS is coming to save us, I suppose. Because, for example, one of the biggest chunks of JavaScript I usually see is to initialize sliders. So in this case, that web page was showing like this for 2 seconds. And then after, of course, depending on the device. But the 75th percentile was after 2 seconds, it was rendered like that. So meaning we were initializing sliders, 7 sliders at page load, and that's not a good thing. In the future, we will probably have something like, so you can already do some sort of snap type using CSS, but that's limited and in the functionality and also in the coolness of the design, I would say. But in the future, we will able to, with CSS Overflow module level 5, do something like that. So we can have sliders with no JavaScript, with a lot of effects. You can slide videos, you can have 3D effects and those kind of things. So I am really keen to see this being shipped, because then I will push a lot to remove all the JavaScript from there. But of course, there's first-party JavaScript, there's third-party JavaScript, but the thing is, yeah, we should run less JavaScript. But the problem is also the thing with the lot of frameworks now, right? So,
Mhm.
and React, Angular and stuff. It depends also on what you need to do. Also, Angular is maybe used for complex applications, and I see a lot of React in the websites, in the e-commerce websites. And yeah, there are new platforms coming up doing server-side rendering. There is Next.js, of course. There is Astro, which is really promising to just server-side everything, server-side render everything, and then hydrate the page later, and only the parts that needs to be interactive. So supposedly we will see less and less JavaScript in the future. But on the other hand, I have also friends that ask me, "Hey, Andrea, why we had 3G and then 4G and now we have 5G and the websites are still fucking slow as they used to be before?" And the answer is that we are shipping a lot of things. videos, images, JavaScript code. Yeah. So we should care more about splitting and just serving to the customer, to the client, what only the portion of JavaScript that we actually need on the page. And then there is third parties, Google Tag Manager. Developers don't even have control on what runs on Google Tag Manager, because you have your website, which is performing super cool out of the box. Then you put it to production, and then the marketing adds a lot of tags via Tag Manager, and then it performs like, what's this? What happened to my website? You know,
Yeah.
and then you have to ask, what is this for? Is this required? Do you need in all countries? Because if you serve at e-commerce in multiple countries, maybe that's only for one country and you have enabled in every country. Do you need it now, or do you need it like for only for 15 days and then we can turn it off? Those kind of things are also the questions that we were asking a lot to the marketing teams, because they don't really care or know the impact of web performance. A/B testing solutions also. Via A/B testing solutions, we had our team in Milan that were just pushing a lot of JavaScript code, really not optimized, not minified through the A/B testing script on our websites. So that's also something that is out of developers' controls usually. So you have to check also all everything that happens after you put it to production.
Yep. You know, you bring up a bunch of good points and a couple of things that I want to ask. Now, I'll start with this one, which is like the last, sort of statement you had just made. You talked about marketing and, they put in their little, tag managers and whatnot. Should there be, should they not be part of like that culture conversation that we talk about? Because, this is something that, engineers have talked about a lot. Like they could have the greatest site, everything's smooth. It's like, oh my God, let's take a picture. This is beautiful. And then, marketing comes in with the tag managers and all hell breaks loose, and, should they not be aware or should they not be more aware of the impending and looming, erosion of user experience that they're about to provide?
Yes.
Mhm.
What else can I say?
You know what I mean? But we've known this for a while. So how does that change? Like do they not know that this is the risk that there's a risk in them sort of creating bad user experiences? Like, do they not think about that in your experience?
Yeah, yeah, I don't think they know about that. So maybe
Mhm,
A/B test, for example, A/B testing scripts, they want to optimize the user experience by testing A versus B.
mhm,
Does this convert more than that? So let's try this button in this place. Let's try this button in that place, in that shape, in that color.
mhm,
But to do that, you have to block the rendering for 1 second.
mhm.
So uh, I would say that we would need an ABC test, then C being without the AB test going on. Because
Funny.
in order to perform the measurement, you have to change the measure to, yeah, so you're spawning it, right? So you, of course, you have A and B, but what if without A/B testing,
Yeah.
how's it perform? Um, that's one thing. Then there is the other marketing thing. So yeah, developers, I don't know, or project managers, product owners
Mhm.
need to tell them that there is an implication on all of these things. Um, yeah, there is a lot of things like coming into my mind now. Also, the accessibility enablers, they are super slow
Mhm.
and they don't actually work quite well.
Mhm.
That's not my words. That's what um, I don't remember the name of the speaker at Performance Now. She said that they are not working.
Yeah. I think it's Marcy Sutton, if it's
Marcy,
accessibility,
Marcy,
who
yeah.
should be on soon, by the way. Um, Something else I want to bring up, and I'd like to maybe even get your opinion on this because uh, we do often realize and see that people will jump on frameworks. They're like, "Oh my God, this is so awesome," and they just, dump everything in, and, they'll say like, "Hey, I used framework XYZ for this, look at the site," and, it may not perform well. But I've often said that, frameworks can be challenging to work with, but I think there's also potentially a challenge of people not being well or very proficient in the framework and understand how to use it to its best capabilities. Um, so, like, we know for the most part, we could probably create a performant WordPress site or React site or, name it. Um, so do you think that there's a bit of challenge with engineers not knowing how to use React to its best?
Oh, I wouldn't say that generically,
Mhm,
because of course it depends on the seniority.
mhm.
I would say that I will be more worried about how I'm sorry if I steer the answer, but
No.
I am really worried about how new developers will learn how to
Mhm,
code, and because now it's very easy to use AI to code,
mhm,
and we all do, I guess. Um, but if you're a senior and you're being doing things for 25 years, you can judge if the code is good or bad, and you can ask AI, "Hey, this is not very optimal. I'd like to change it."
mhm,
If you don't have the experience to do that, it's very likely to copy and paste and the code, and then it might sound a little bit dinosauric, but if you don't do it from scratch, how do you learn how to do it? If you just copy pasting stuff, maybe it's a new way to learn. I don't
mhm.
know, but how do you become a senior if you just bypass everything, the learning thing? So
Yeah.
that's my my prominent question after you ask me.
No, I definitely understand, and like I said, I think I sense there are several ways that people can go about it. The idea to sort of keep performance in mind obviously is going to be first. Because you could just deploy something, then it's like, okay, is this performant? You need to ask that question. But I kind of asked that simply because in my travels, I sense that people just don't ask that question, and they just, go out and use, it's like a full version of a framework, even though there are parts of it that they don't need. And they're just like, okay, this is done, move on to the next project. When there are opportunities to optimize every single framework, like they give you all the tools you need, or they give you all the tools, but there are several that you may not need. And you're like, okay, let me just remove this and kind of like move on to make sure that I don't know, the page is lighter, and again, the idea of having less unused JavaScript is also going to be um, you sort of on your side in terms of having something that has, like, again, a good user experience.
I think I'm part of an elite because I'm working in I've been working in big companies ultimately, and I am in the Bologna JavaScript community and stuff. So there is a lot of good developers. They have time to do properly things, to things properly and optimize things. But there might also be companies that don't allow developers to have a lot of time to optimize. I
Mm.
worked in agencies before where we were 3 developers, and the boss was just saying, "Hey, just deliver this and then go to the next one." So you're not happy as a developer first, and you release something that is very not
Mhm.
not very optimal in terms of performance and quality, right? So if you're if you are delegating to those kind of agencies your development, then there is no way to improve, right? So it depends on the developers, but also on the time given to the developers to improve.
That is a great point, and that's something I actually forgot, and it just brought me back to something that you said at the very start of the stream, how you were on a team, and your team was looking after 30 sites plus, and that does not leave a lot of time to sort of, poke around and, because you and I both know that performance auditing is like police work. You have to poke around, you have to look, you look for little signs of crimes, you know, and and then after that you have to ask questions. You haven't even looked at the code yet. Now you have to walk around and ask questions. But that is true where, orgs may not provide the time for you to make these sort of, audits and really make sure that a site is as performant as possible. So thanks for bringing that back up.
It can be police work or and firefighting work,
It is.
depending on how urgent it becomes. But it can also be done um, in the beginning with the performance in mind, right? So that's what the performance culture
Mhm.
needs to aims to do, right? To teach and the developers and go with them and tell them those are the best practices. Please do that in a good way from the beginning.
Mhm, mhm. Speaking of police work, I'm sure there was a lot of police work happening yesterday at Cloudflare, you know.
For sure.
So we know what that's about. If a bunch of developers are listening to the stream, and they've heard you or watching the stream, and they've heard you talk about the issues around INP. And by the way, folks, I'm gonna post link to the slides and the original talk that he gave over at Performance Sync. So you'll be able to sort of go through that. I know you mentioned like these are the things that you see. What are the things that you would recommend all developers, let alone, newer ones, but, what would you recommend to all developers as they sort of like set up a project and you want them to make sure that, they look after IMP especially, but, everything that is web performance related?
Well, for IMP especially, I have the takeaways from the talk based on my most common mistakes. The
Hmm.
first two are repeating the same thing. So to yield to the main thread before
Hmm.
calling tracking functions. That's what I briefly mentioned before even calling a push to tag manager or something. Just be sure to yield to the main thread. And if you don't know how to do it, there is information in the slides. Um, Set custom CSS properties because also changing the CSS properties in the body, they can also have an impact on layout time. So set the CSS properties close to where you need them. And request animation frame should only be used for animations, just not to do any type of long JavaScript code, because people might think that request animation frame is magic and doesn't require CPU time, but it does require CPU time. So it's just in a different thread of the event loop, not thread, sorry, just in a different branch of the event loop. And then all the JavaScript code that is not currently needed should not be executed right now. So delay the JavaScript code that is not needed now and load it after, execute it after, split it, chunk it, do a lot of magics. And especially if it's not needed in the client, don't ship it to the client. If it's only used to do server-side rendering, server-side render the page, stream the HTML, and then load only the JavaScript required for the interactions. That's the takeaways for the IMP. And also, I would have for CSS and LCP, but then it would become a very long conclusion, I'd say.
Mhm, mhm. Because you had mentioned earlier, and maybe not earlier here, but I know in your talk you'd mentioned that one of the challenges that you kind of came across was also reflow,
Yeah.
and how that was sort of like creating its own little set of hurdles and
Yeah.
bottlenecks. You know.
Yeah, there's a page maintained, GitHub Gist, I guess, maintained by Paul Irish, listing all the methods and properties that you can, that if you call via JavaScript, they trigger a layout reflow immediately. So they cause layout crashing. So you should try to batch all of these calls in one point. So read before and then write later. Otherwise, if you do read write, you're causing a layout crashing.
Yeah.
And that's also, but it was not in these slides, this part. But that's also a huge thing to consider. Sometimes I just see a lot of get bounding client rect calls slowing down because there are some those pixels or tags that are tracking the mouse movement and where is the things on the page, what was clicked exactly, what it was, and those use a lot of get bounding client rect, and usually they slow down interactions as well.
Hmm. Um, it just goes to show, folks, there's so much going on a page that we may or may not realize. And, as Andrea alluded to earlier, you may have a customer who's, shopping for like that Chloe Armani, whatever, elite brand that's out there. But chances are they're coming from a particular phone. Habitually high end, shoppers may have high end devices, and they may not have the same effect to their device that a lower end device may have, as we sort of like talked about, because there are definitely two classes of users. I remember Alex Russell, talks about how the I in iPhone stands for inequality, and how the phones are so powerful that they don't realize all the challenges that are, embedded within a site. And Jakob Gross talked about this as well over at Framer. He's talked about like lower end devices, like that was his baptism to web performance, understanding how things are completely different when you have a cheap device. The web is not the same. And he's trying to sort of, bridge that gap and make sure that's not the case. So, great. So, Andrea, someone has been just enamored with your presentation. He's watched it offline or off this stream, or they have, and they've watched the stream. They've been just like impressed. How do they get in touch with you?
Well, look for me in the website. My website is Andrea Verlicchi, like you're reading my name, .eu, like Europe. And there is all the contacts there.
Mhm,
And usually I'm active on LinkedIn.
mhm.
I don't use a lot of social media actually because it drains too much of people's attention.
Right, right, right. It can be a little
There
bit
are
intense.
there are all the links in my website in the contacts page. There are also Blue Sky and other things.
Okay. And I know you're also, we didn't mention this earlier, but I know you're also a GDE.
Yes.
So I'm assuming you probably have a set of presentations out there, a bunch of blog posts that people could read. I'm assuming that's probably going to be on your site as well.
See, yes, sorry. In my website, I'm posting also some news, things that I got my attention. And sometimes I'll post on the SpeedKit blog, but mostly I do talks. I like to do talks and also try out new Google products, give feedback to them.
Mhm.
Those kind of things are all the activities that allows you to keep the um, GDE badge, let's say, that thing.
And you talked about things that are getting your attention. What is getting your attention today, right now, or
Just an ice cream.
I was going to bring that up eventually, but I'm glad you did. You talked about using coding assistance. Have you been using it? What has it felt like? Did you feel, like it's
I tried different AI models to do coding.
Mhm,
I was using mostly OpenAI. I like the thinking models because I usually also tend to involve them when there is a particularly challenging task.
mhm,
So I was using O1 at the time, and Claude. It was, I think, the 3.7.
mhm,
And I was at this presentation in Paris with on Google Cloud and all
mhm.
the stuff. And they said, "Hey, have you tried Gemini 2.5 Pro for coding?" And I tried that, and I fell in love. So now I've been using it until yesterday. Uh, so today I'm trying to. I didn't have the chance yet to do a lot of attempts, but I'm literally in love with that. And we are also trying to use AI to assess the alerts that we get from, I mentioned before, this is not very performance related, but when there is an LCP or LCLS or IMP deviation from the standard, we get notified. So we can investigate and eventually inform our customers something is going off about your IMP, your CLS. And then we have to do the investigations manually, right?
Mhm.
So we want to insert AI there in the process. So before we even get the alert, the Gemini model receives all the data and the eventually can talk with the MCP server of DevTools, run the
Mm.
investigation, and already provide some indications. So when we receive the alerts, we already have, hey, this has happened, and this can possibly be the cause. So you have still to investigate manually, but you actually have an idea of where to look exactly, and that makes you save time, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so I've just prompted Gemini 3 today a couple of times for not coding. So I didn't see yet the difference from the 2.45 Pro and the 3 models,
Yeah.
but I'm definitely hyped.
I do like the idea of just being given some immediate clues. I think is definitely interesting. I was at a conference last year and I saw someone, I forget which company, but they're basically I think it was like a observability company, but they were talking about using AI and sort of like in that kind of sense, being given clues and doing some some alerting beyond the classic alert that we're familiar with. Andrea, I want to thank you very much for today's conversation. And again, I wanted to sort of have that opportunity for you to come on and sort of talk about your presentation over at Performance Sync and potentially in more details. Because again, I realize that sometimes a lightning talk, you're just like, oh, I wish I could talk about this, but I don't have time. And, there's like 8 other speakers that night, and you don't want boss looking at you funny either because
Yeah,
I know he was hosting. Any closing words before I sort of like end this stream?
just thank you. Thank you for inviting me,
Oh,
and thank you for having me, and thank you for everyone that watched. I also see the comments. Thank you, guys. See you on the next time.